Hey everybody, let's talk about whether the Targaryens are fireproof, okay? Let's get to the bottom of this once and for all. Here we go. Okay, first and foremost, spoiler warning 4. Game of Thrones, Song of Ice and Fire, Fire and Blood, House of the Dragon, World of Ice and Fire, etc. Right, second of all, I found a really awesome glittery eyeshadow, but unfortunately over the course of the day it's migrated around my face and I couldn't get it all off. So you're gonna see weird little reflections. Sorry, whatever. So let's get to the bottom of this, okay? Really what I want to do here is have a one-stop shop video where beginners and book readers and super nerds alike can have this issue of the Targaryens being fireproof solved once and for all, no question. However, we have to go into each of the different sources that mention something about this, or fail to mention it. Okay, so let's start with the Game of Thrones show. Game of Thrones, the show, is based on a series of books by George R.R. Martin, of which only the first one is called Game of Thrones. There's 5 of them right now. There's supposed to be 7, but we've been waiting over 10 years for book 6. So 5 came out right before the show, and then the show was a big hit, and then there were a lot of things that happened, and we're still waiting for that 6th book, and I don't even know what's going to happen with the 7th one. So what happened was Game of Thrones, the show, ended the story before all the books were out. And the books are the source material that Game of Thrones was based on. So if you're just watching the show, and by the way, this is going to have character names and stuff that I'm assuming you're here because you've watched the show or read something of some sort and are trying to figure this out, okay? So I'm not going to explain every name, but I am going to explain how the series fit together, etc. Anyway, getting back to that. In the show, there are really only 2 Targaryens to start out with that we know of. And one of them survives a huge fire at a funeral. Okay, Daenerys. She also has some foreshadowing throughout the first season. She gets into a bath that's super hot and her servants are worried that she's going to burn herself, and she doesn't. She puts a dragon egg into a fire thingy, and then her servant takes it out and the servant is burned and Daenerys' hands aren't. Okay, so she touches something hot and she's not burnt. So there's foreshadowing throughout the first season of Game of Thrones show. And then in the end, she has this really huge kick-ass scene where she survives a huge fire and hatches the dragons at the same time. It's amazing, right? And in the book, that was one of the best cliffhangers I have ever read. All of a sudden, the dragons are out. It was the very last chapter in here. And then in the show, Daenerys is fireproof from then on. I'm sure there's other little things in between, but all the way down in season 6 of the show, she famously survives a giant fire where she kills all the leaders of the Dothraki, who kind of deserved it anyway, and walks out of the fire again. So if you're just watching the show, Daenerys is fireproof. Admittedly, probably more people have watched the show than read the books, so if you've only got that source, Daenerys was fireproof. Her brother, Viserys, who has the same name as in House of the Dragon, but is completely different from Viserys, he died from molten lava gold being poured on his head, which arguably is heat and not fire, but he died from heat that wouldn't have burned Daenerys. So were all Targaryens fireproof? I don't know. According to the show, it seems like, I don't know, maybe like the worthy ones aren't, or like the pure blood ones aren't, because later on we find a couple more Targaryens. I'm not going to say who the most famous one is that we don't learn about until like near the very end, but he gets burned by a lantern in season 1, so he clearly can be burned as well. Now he's half Targaryen. But Daenerys is fireproof in the show, period. Okay? Show, however, is based on the books. In the funeral pyre scene in here, Daenerys walks out of the fire. Her hair is burned off and her clothes, which, you know, are also burned off in the show. But it is implicated in here, indicated, one of those, that she was able to do so because of a combination of circumstances that happened around that one event. She was literally burning a witch at the time. Dragons are magic. The fire was super hot, hotter than any, you know, little fireplace or candle could make it. And she had this, like, intuition that the dragon eggs needed really hot fire. There was, like, blood sacrifice discussed and stuff like that. I mean, there were all these circumstances that made it so that scene, she was able to survive the fire with the dragons, and it was awesome. But the fireproofness isn't a quality of the Targaryens in the book. And the second famous fire scene in the show, where she kills all the leaders of the Dothraki and walks out of the flames, we haven't gotten to in the books yet. So we don't know how she does that, or if she does that. The last Daenerys scene in the book series, not in this one, but in the 5th book, is where Drogon has just taken her out of the slave pit, and she doesn't know where she is. She's in the middle of nowhere and ends up in Dothraki territory. That is pretty close to how it was in the book, but that's the last scene we have of Daenerys, and Jon Snow had just gotten murdered. So when season 6 of the show came out, all of us nerds were like, our book nerds were like, what's gonna happen? What's the next thing? Like, oh my god, like, we're finally gonna find out. And we were happy to. And honestly, I think season 6 was probably my favorite season, maybe because of the hype up for that. Also maybe because Battle of the Bastards and my favorite Daenerys scene is also in that episode. But anyway, so we don't have that Dothraki scene in the books to compare to. However, George R.R. Martin, who is the original author of the original books, the original series of he's the source, came from his brain, has said that Targaryens are not supposed to be fireproof. Even though if you've only watched the show, Daenerys is fireproof. So it depends on the source, okay? But there's 2 more sources I'm going to talk about. There's a show out now called House of the Dragon, which is a prequel to the Game of Thrones series. The book that it's based on is called Fire and Blood, and it is also a prequel to the Game of Thrones series. I can't fit all 5 books in my hand. They're all this length, and there's 5 of them, and this is just the paperback. There are other books about this world, for example, The World of Ice and Fire, that kind of has an even more abbreviated list of events and people that were important in this universe. All right, but Fire and Blood, again, which is the prequel book about specifically the Targaryens, they're not fireproof. They're not. It's not in here. And this is just part 1 of the Targaryen history. But again, came from George R.R. Martin, who said they're not fireproof. So we're kind of 0 for 2 here with the books. Daenerys survived a fire, but is not fireproof. And none of the Targaryens in history are fireproof. If I'm wrong, send me a comment. I will gladly make an update to this video. Okay, but here's where it gets even more confusing, if that was confusing to start out with. The show House of the Dragon, season 1, has some scenes where certain Targaryens are fireproof. And I can't explain it. The reason why right now there's like 1 million people commenting, are they fireproof? Wait, I thought they were fireproof. Wait, Daenerys survived a fire. Why didn't Aegon survive a fire? Because right now we're in season 2 of House of the Dragon, and the Dragon Rider was just burned to a crisp. And we're like, how can that happen if Targaryens are fireproof? So then this all came up. Clearly he wasn't fireproof, or maybe his armor just melted and that's what burned him. However, both book series have not had fireproof Targaryens. But let's go back to House of the Dragon season 1. there are some scenes in here where I thought they were continuing the Targaryen fireproof part, or at least the full-blooded Targaryen, or maybe like a worthy Targaryen is fireproof. I don't know, it's not consistent, but I can show you exactly what I mean. So in House of the Dragon Season 1, the very first episode, King Viserys, different Viserys from Game of Thrones, King Viserys is holding his hand over a candle. Not just like through it, but for a really long time, he's holding his hand over these candles. This is in episode 1 of season 1. So wouldn't that kind of burn him? What's going on here? So I really thought there were some subtle hints to people still being fireproof. Next, in season 1, episode 3, Daemon is attacking the Stepstones with Caraxes, his dragon, and he gets hit with a flaming arrow. And he burns. And there's actually burns on his body that show up later in the series. So he's clearly not fireproof? However, in season 1, episode 6, he is flying with his wife on her dragon, and her dragon, Vhagar, blows a big cloud of fire, and Daemon, on his dragon, flies right through it. So is he fireproof now? I mean, it's not just like a little puff of flame. It's like a huge thing. And I understand that the dragons are mostly fireproof. I'll read something about that actually in here, but is he fireproof now? Like, what's going on? That's a really big cloud of fire. I don't think a normal person could just like not burn at all from it. So I don't understand. In another scene, I don't know if this is going to count or not. Again, it's still in season 1. Viserys has the cat's paw dagger in hot coals, fire, and it heats up the metal enough for him and Rhaenyra to read the Valyrian that's written in the blade. I was watching this, though, just today, and it has a metal handle, it seems like. Now, usually the handles or pommels or whatever you want to call them for these weapons are made of a different material for the grip, but this looked like the heat from the blade would transfer up this knife where Viserys pulled it out of the fire and was holding it. Like, it seems like it would have burned his hand, but it didn't. That one could be maybe explained that there was a heat-proof, something wrapped around the handle. And another reason why I thought it was showing us that the Targaryens would or could be fireproof is it's a very small Easter egg that I picked up on in season 1, episode 6. This is the first time we see the new actor for Rhaenyra, Emma Darcy, and the character is old enough that she has 2 of her kids, just had the 3rd, Jacaerys, and it's Lucerys still, but they call him Luke. I always get that mixed up. They have a heat incubator thing for the dragon egg, and Jacaerys, the older kid, picks up the lid and shows the egg. His little brother, and these are let's be real, these are half Targaryens, okay? Like, they're supposed to be her husband's kids, but they're not. So Jacaerys, the older one, picks up this metal lid of the egg. The younger one reaches in and gets burned and like moves his hand back. And Jacaerys kind of is like, no, don't touch it. But he's holding the metal lid of this hot pot.
We chose an egg for the baby.
Ah, that looks like the perfect one.
I let Luke choose. Thank you, Jace.
Not every day an egg leaves the dragon pit princess. I thought it best to escort the lads.
So I thought that was a cool little thing that was like an Easter egg for like half Targaryens aren't fireproof. or some Targaryens are fireproof because Jacaerys picked it up, but Lucerys couldn't touch it. Alright, so now, just now, we're in season 2 of House of the Dragon. And there haven't been any fireproof Targaryens. So today is the Friday after episode 5 of season 2 aired. So in 2 days, episode 6 is going to air. In episode 5, we learned that King Aegon, who's king now after Viserys, kinda, they were in a big dragon battle in episode 4. And in episode 5, we kind of learn how injured he is. There were 3 dragons. King Aegon was on one and was basically burnt to a crisp. Rhaenys, who's an older generation, she and her dragon died. And we don't see her body in the show, but in the books she's burnt to a crisp so bad that they can barely recognize her, although she's with her dragon, so duh. But in episode 5, we learned that Aegon has burns really bad all over his body. His armor basically melted, which was in the books, so he's clearly not fireproof, heat-proof. He didn't have any armor on his face, and his face is still burned, so now, in season 2, we're seeing people that are not fireproof. In season 1, it was iffy. And in Game of Thrones, the show had a fireproof person and the books didn't. So here's the final answer for, are Targaryens fireproof? I don't know. Are they? Not according to the lore. Not according to either book series. I mean, Fire and Blood doesn't have a part 2 out yet, but, you know, one is... And Fire and Blood has a lot more than just the House of the Dragon material. It goes all the way back to Aegon's conquest, and then continues after this House of the Dragon situation. I'm not going to go into spoilers of, like, what eventually happens in House of the Dragon. So we really only have one source that has a definitive fireproof Targaryen, and it is just Daenerys. I think it's cool, right? I think it's cool that she would be fireproof. I think it's a cool thing that maybe the Targaryens would share, or maybe just worthy Targaryens. There's a lot of different little things woven in about like whether someone is worthy of the throne or not, so that kind of fits. But it's just not supported in the material. Season 1 of House of the Dragon was hella confusing. Season 2 seems to be pretty consistent with itself, but not with Season 1. And Game of Thrones books sort of show, yes. So this is why it's controversial. Hold on, let me see if I can find the dragons themselves. I'll read you what it says in Fire and Blood about the dragons being fireproof, basically. On page 532, this is the hardback, a dragon's scales are largely, though not entirely, impervious to flame. They protect the more vulnerable flesh and musculature beneath. As a dragon ages, its scales thicken and grow harder, affording even more protection, even as its flames burn hotter and fiercer. Where the flames of a hatchling can set straw aflame, the flames of Balerion, who's not in the show, and Vhagar, who's in House of the Dragon, in the fullness of their power, could and did melt steel and stone. When 2 dragons meet in mortal combat, therefore, they will oft employ weapons other than their flame. Claws black as iron, long as swords, and sharp as razors. Jaws so powerful they can crunch through even a knight's steel plate. Tails like whips whose lashing blows have been known to smash wagons to splinters, break the spine of heavy destriers, which is a fancy medieval word for one of the war horses, and send men flying 50 feet in the air. Yeah. So according to that, it makes sense why Sunfire, who was the youngest dragon in that fight with Aegon on him, was the most injured. Well, except Meleys died, but she had her head bitten off, so what do you expect? So Vhagar really is a powerful weapon for more than one reason. More than just her size, and more than just her rider. She's grown enough that she is more and more impervious to things that could harm her. So, I don't know. It makes sense, I suppose. So, maybe that cleared something up. I think probably the largest following would be for Game of Thrones, the show, which has one fireproof person in it. Daenerys was fireproof. So that seemed a given. It is confusing to keep all of these people separate, especially because 18 of them are named Aegon or something. This is a real thing in history that they would repeat names of royalty. I mean, that's how we got 8 Henrys. Henry VIII, hello? Like, there were 8 of them. So we've got Aegon II right now, even though there's a lot of other Aegons that have been scattered around, and Rhaenyra herself has an Aegon as a son. I don't care if they retcon it and I'm like, just a couple are fireproof and it dies out, or, you know, like, if you have a Game of Thronesy world type of reason for it, I'm fine with that, you know, whatever. But it hasn't really been addressed. And the biggest, what I imagine to be the biggest population of fans has seen a fireproof person in the show, not in real life. People aren't fireproof that I've met. Leave a comment. I'll make an update. So yeah, so those are basically 4 explanations and discussions of whether Targaryens are fireproof. Take from that what you will. Go read all the books and watch all the shows. It's really interesting. The books go way farther in depth about certain characters and details about what happens. One thing I didn't mention though is that the Game of Thrones, the first book, the Song of Ice and Fire series, is extremely detailed and goes into the perspectives of the characters and how they felt and what their character arcs are, whereas Fire and Blood is like 300 years of history. I think we only have half of it at this point. Fire and Blood is it supposed to be a history written by people who weren't there, just kind of listing the events. So we got a lot less detail in here. That Daenerys scene in the funeral pyre in Game of Thrones, the show, is almost word for word what's in here. Like, the dialogue is taken directly from the book. It's probably the only series that follows the book dialogue that closely. This is way different. They have to kind of read between the lines because there's literally like 2 pages about a major event and that's all we get. So it's a different kind of source. This one allows for more departures from the source material to happen, but Targaryens aren't fireproof in here. Let me know what you think. This is a really interesting topic and I kind of had fun digging back into it, but the answer's pretty clear. I mean, like, 3 of the things have non-fireproof Targaryens out of the 4. Game of Thrones show, yes. Game of Thrones books, no. Fire and Blood, no. House of the Dragon, probably not. I would love to, like, not see people asking the same question a million times. So that's what inspired me to make this video, is maybe I could just be like, here, I explained it, go watch it. So I hope you enjoyed this. This is a little bit of a departure from what we usually do on the channel. We're art and animals here, and while, you know, TV and books are art, it's usually more like makeup or dance or stuff like that, but I'm obviously a big fan and a big nerd, so I wanted to make this. I'll put it out as bonus content, and if you enjoy it, leave a like. You can subscribe because more are gonna come out like this. I mean, it's my channel, I can do what I want. So there's gonna be more content, and I have a couple of other videos from this season and a bunch from season 1 of House of the Dragon, but admittedly I was pretty much a very beginner there, so they didn't turn out as good. But I hope you enjoy them. Go click on stuff, and thanks for watching. Talk to you soon. No, that's not it. Yeah. And cat hair. Wow, there's like glitter everywhere around me too. The most recent episode, right? But in the 5th episode, there's... No. Vhagar escaped the... Why did I say it like that? So,